The story of Norway starts with a dream. The wife of Halfdan the Black, Ragnhild, dreamt that she was out in the garden and that she had gotten a thorn into her dress. While she was holding this thorn, it became a long string. One end dug itself deep down in the earth and became strong roots. The other end quickly became a large tree, so big that she could barely see the top. The bottom of the tree was red as blood. Higher up, it became green and flourishing, and the branches as white as snow. There were many twigs that came out of this tree, some high up and others further down. The tree crown was so great that it seemed that it could reach over the entirety of Norway and beyond. The symbolism in this is obvious. Ragnhild saw with this tree the family tree of the Norwegian royal family. The red base represents the bloody fighting that came to define the early Norwegian kingdom, while the flourishing green symbolizes the flourishing of the kingdom in years to come, and the deep, strong roots, the strength of which this was all built. Halfdan the Black was during this time king over most of eastern Norway, and was guesting around his kingdom, and the route he took passed over the ice of the Hafsfjord. This would prove to be a mistake, as the local farmers had made holes in the ice, so that their cattle could drink, and had in so doing weakened the ice. And so, when Halfdan and his men crossed the ice, it gave way, and submerged Halfdan, drowning him. With this, the events that would unite Norway into one kingdom was set in motion. The one to accomplish it was to be his son, Harald Hårfagre, or in English, Harald Fairhair, the first king over all of Norway. Harald was 10 years old when he inherited his father's kingdom, and along with him, his uncle. Guttorm was his name. He was in control over the army, since Harald was so young at the time. After the death of Halfdan the Black, many of the neighboring rulers attacked the kingdom he had left to his son Harald. The first of these were King Gandalf. This name might ring a bell for viewers familiar with the J.R.R. Tolkien. Here is the original source material he would have read in preparation for Lord of the Rings, and likely where he got the name. After him, however, two brothers also attacked from the northern region of Hedmark. In addition to this, yet another, Hogne Karlsson, was running rampant in the regions of Ringerike. Harald was off to a bad start, with enemies closing in on every side, and his kingdom had now shrunk in size. The only region he still had firm control over was the region of Vestfold. Harald and his uncle Guttorm were now with their backs against the wall, and needed something to turn the tide. It was, in the midst of this, that Hake Gandalfsson came with 300 men against Harald. Hake took a northern route through the valley in hope of taking his opponents with surprise. Meanwhile, King Gandalf was home with his army, and intended to cross the fjord into Vestfold. However, Guttorm got word of this and gathered an army to meet them. Him and Harald first went north to stop Hake. The two sides met in a valley, where a battle was fought. Harald and Guttorm came out on top and won. Hake died along with many of his men, and the valley has since been known as Hakadalen. English, the Hake Valley. After this, Harald and Guttorm returned home, only to learn that King Gandalf had landed with an army. The two armies met, and a fierce battle was fought between them. Gandalf lost, and many of his men were killed on their retreat home. When the two brothers in Hedmark heard the news that King Gandalf had been defeated, they anticipated that an army would soon come their way as well. And so they sent messengers to both Hogne Karlsson of Ringerike and Gudbrand, the man controlling the northern region, and invited them all to a meeting in Hedmark. As it turned out, their anticipation was right, because shortly after this, Harald and Guttorm gathered all the men they could get and went north. traveling mostly through forests to come upon their opponents unexpectedly. As they got closer, they learned where all the local rulers were staying and arrived in the middle of the night. The guards did not notice anything right up until Harald and his party was right outside of the house where Hogne Karlsson and Gudbrand were sleeping. Both houses were set alight. The two brothers that were the rulers of Hedmark were able to get out and did for a short time take up arms and fight back. However, they were severely outnumbered and were struck down. After all this, Harald, with help from Guttorm, were able to put under themselves large swathes of land including Ringerike, Hedmark, Gudbrandsdalen, Hadeland, Toten, Romerike, and the northern part of Vingulmork. Many battles was fought between Harald and Gandalf. However, in the last one, Gandalf fell, and Harald was able to take control over the territory down to the river Glomma. Harald's kingdom had now grown substantially, and was now at this point a powerful king, having large parts of eastern Norway under his control. And so he sent some of his men up into the region known as Valdres, because there was the daughter of a powerful family, and he wanted her as his mistress, and her name was Gyda. However, when his men came to her with this proposal, she flat out refused, and told them that she would not settle for a king that only controlled but a mere few regions, and followed up with, "I find it odd that there is no one with a will to lay under himself all of Norway into one kingdom, just as Gorm in Denmark or Eirik of Uppsala." The men Harald had sent did not know how to respond to this, and saw no way of getting her to come unless she chose to do so willingly. They made ready to return home, but then, when they were about to leave, Gyda came out to them and told them that she would accept and become Harald's wife on the one condition, and that was if he would unite all of Norway into one kingdom, and to do so for her sake. The men came back to Harald and told him what she had told them. His men urged him to send a large party back to her, and to, quote, "in such a way as to bring shame on her," end quote. You get the picture. They explained that she had been both rude and unrespectful. But Harald did not see it that way. In fact, he didn't think Gyda had said anything rude at all, and furthermore explained that he ought to thank her for giving him the idea. Quote, "She has reminded me of something. It's quite odd that I haven't thought of myself sooner," he went on.
Quote, "I hereby give this oath, and with the God that has forged me and resides over all things as my witness, that I will not cut nor comb my hair until I control all of Norway with taxes and rule, total executive power, or die in the attempt." End quote.
His good uncle Guttorm thanked him for this word, and told him that it was proper royal custom to keep his word. The two friends together raised a large army and began to march north, first to Upplandet, up through Gudbrandsdalen, and over Dovrefjell. When he came down into the villages, he killed all the men and burnt all the houses. Word of this quickly spread, and people began to flee. Some to Orkdal, some to Gauldal, and some fled into the forests. Others came to Harald and asked for peace, and that was given to all who agreed to join him in his ranks. Harald and Guttorm met no resistance until they came to Orkdal. Here, people had gathered and were led by a king named Gryting. The two armies clashed, and a battle was fought, with the result being that many of Gryting's men were cut down, and Harald emerged the victor. The king Gryting was taken captive, and he too swore allegiance to Harald and became his man, and along with him, all of Orkdøla fylke, the region he controlled. For this next part, we need some context, and we need to understand some key words and terms. Let's look at the structure of the early Norwegian kingdom under King Harald. Highest up, you have the king, obviously. Here, in this case, this is King Harald, the main character. And under him, there are his jarls. In English, you would refer to them as earls. Under them again, you have the hashe. Now, I am not accustomed to English royal titles and what the equivalent would be in English as opposed to the Norwegian terms. So, we will stick with the Norwegian and the originals that I am familiar with. In King Harald's government, it was required that every jarl have a minimum of 4 hashes under them. Every jarl would contribute 60 men to Harald's army, and every hashe 20 men. In addition to this, he also brought major reform to the tax system. He revoked the odel right. This is the right that every farmer owned his own land and that his closest family would inherit or had priority in buying the property. He made away with this and made himself the owner of all land, and made everyone in his kingdom pay him a lease of sorts of the land. This included both the rich and the poor alike. With these changes in place, the jarls became more powerful under Harald's rule than they had been independent. When word of this spread, a lot of local rulers came to him and wanted to become his jarls as well. One of the men that came to Harald was Håkon Jarl Grotgardsson. He was the ruler of Ørlandet, and he came with a great many men. From here, King Harald headed east into Gauldal, where he met an army of 2 kings. Another battle was fought, and Harald won and took their land. Those being Gauldøla fylke, as well as Strinda fylke. He gave Håkon Jarl control over Strinda fylke, and he himself pushed on further into the fjord, where a 3rd battle was fought, and here too he took control. Seeing all of this unfolding were the chieftains further up in the fjord. They understood that there was no easy way out of this, and they would have to come together to try to defeat Harald. And so, 4 kings united and came together with an army. That was the rulers of Verdalen, Skogn, Sparbygja fylke, and Øna fylke. The 4 rulers came with their army against Harald in an attempt to turn the tide around and to drive him out. However, it did not go their way. Yet again, Harald won, and some of the local rulers died and others fled. The campaign in Trønderlag was a stunning success, and it is said that King Harald Fairhair fought at least 8 battles in Trønderlag, and after had slain 8 kings, became the sole ruler of the entirety of the region. To the north of Harald's kingdom, at this time, was Namdal, a large valley, and in the northern part of this valley were at the time 2 kings. And they had been building a large hill out of stone, chalk and timber. When the hill was complete, they got news that Harald was now headed towards them with his army. And one of the kings, King Harlaug, made sure to fill the hill with food and drink, and along with 11 of his men, they sealed it shut, choosing rather to die by their own hand than to be forced into subjugation. The other king chose a different path. He went to the place where the king had their throne and sat himself on it. And thereafter, he ceremoniously renounced his throne and took up the seat that would have been reserved for their jarls. After this whole ordeal, he went to King Harald and told him what he had done, and gave him his entire kingdom. In response to this, King Harald took a sword and put it around the waist and a shield on his back. Harald made him jarl over Namdøla fylke. He now returned to Trøndelag and remained there during the winter. And during this winter, he built his largest king's farm. You see, during this time, there was no one capital, and the king had multiple residences across the kingdom. But this one would become special, and he always referred to this as his home. He also took Håkon Jarl's daughter as his wife, as the 2 men had grown close during this period. And furthermore, he had made his ship ready for a new campaign, and for himself he had built a great dragon ship, the classic Viking ship. King Harald Fairhair had also a first-class royal guard, or hird as it's known in Norwegian, as he could choose from the best of the best from each county across his vast kingdom, and it was in this position of power he made ready his next move. To the west of Trønderlag, there were two regions, Møre and Romsdal. These two regions were at the time ruled by a king each, and the king in Møre had a son called Sølve Klove. As it turned out, this region was Harald's next move, and he came towards them with his powerful and damn near unstoppable army, comprised by the best of the best. Once the situation became apparent for the two kings of Møre and Romsdal, they gathered as many men as they could and clashed at Solskjell. This battle went as expected. Harald and his men won, and both the petty kings fell in the fighting. However, Sølve Klove was able to get away. New jarls were put in charge, and just like that, in one fell swoop, yet another region was conquered and put under Harald's rule. The following spring, King Harald again called upon his army to mobilize, and made it clear that his intention was to sail against the region of Sunnmøre this time. You see, during the winter, Sølve Klove had been raiding in Møre and killed many of King Harald's men and burned farms. He had spent much of his time in Sunnmøre with his friend the king of Sunnmøre. They understood that they did not have sufficient men to give any meaningful resistance to Harald. So, Sølve Klove sailed further south to Fjordane and met with the local king, urging him to gather his men at once and join them in the fight against Harald. Quote, "It is not unlikely that it will go well for us if we rise all as one against him, for we have the necessary forces together, and let fate decide the victors. Or we have to become Harald's slaves, and that is no worthy way for men of our standing. My father, the king of Møre, chose to fight and die in his own kingdom, rather than to become Harald's underling." End quote. Sølve Klove talked with a silver tongue, and so convincingly that the king of Fjordane promised him he would call upon his men and indeed join them in the struggle against Harald. And so he did. He gathered all the men he could muster and came north to Sunnmøre. There the three armies met. Sølve Klove with the men left after the first battle of Solskjell, the king of Sunnmøre and the king of Fjordane now stood united, and there was no time to spare. For as soon as the king of Fjordane arrived, the news came that Harald and his fleet had set sail. The two armies sailed against one another, and this time too the battle stood at Solskjell. Thus began the second battle of Solskjell. It was common during this time to tie all the ships together, forming a long line of ships. This was the case here as well. The two sides made ready, and with force the two lines of ships made contact, and the fighting immediately became bloody, and both sides were now taking significant losses. King Harald put his ship up against the king of Sunnmøre, and it was at this point the toughest battles were taking place. Seeing this, King Harald became enraged and surged forth in the heat of battle. The men of the opposing ships grew fearful and retreated behind the mast. Harald and his men came aboard, and the men of Sunnmøre lost their courage. Some fought, but most jumped ship. The king of both Sunnmøre and Fjordane fell, but Sølve Klove was able once again to get away. The fighting died down and the battle was over. The second battle of Solskjell was a victory for Harald. It didn't happen right away, but before long, both regions came under Harald's control. He now ruled the by far largest kingdom in Norway, and there were few left who could oppose him. He now felt that the time was right to return to his initial kingdom in Vestfold. Harald had now been away on campaign for 4 years, and a lot had happened back home while he was away. The most pressing issue was that of the Swedish king. You see, while he had been away, Eirik Edmundsson, the king of Sweden, had been hard at work claiming new lands for himself. His kingdom now encompassed both Värmland and Västergötaland. What more is that he claimed that the region of Västergötaland stretched all the way out to the west coast and north all the way to Svinesund. And all this land now paid the Swedish king taxes instead of Harald. Furthermore, King Eirik of Sweden had proclaimed that he would not stop his expansion until he had as large a kingdom in Viken as Ragnar Lodbrok had had. Yes, this is the same Ragnar Lodbrok that TV series is inspired by. However, unlike fiction, this was a very real king, ruling the entirety of the region known as Viken, all the way to the Hafsfjord. Harald disliked this, and right away made a move. First, he called a thing for the people of Folden, and here he accused them of treason and national betrayal. Some were able to prove their innocence, while others were subject to harsh fines and other punishments. During the entirety of the summer, he went around the region and called things everywhere he went. However, early in the winter, he got word that Eirik was guesting around Värmland. Upon learning this, Harald made ready his people and headed east. When Harald entered Värmland, he sent a message to the richest man in the region and asked him to come as a guest. His name was Åke. This was arranged, and Åke also invited King Eirik at the same time. Both kings came to his farm, and Åke had two grand guest houses, one brand new he had just built, and the other older. He chose to put Harald and his men in the newer house and gave them the best tableware and accessories. This fact did not go unnoticed by the Swedish king that got the older house. The saga does not mention anything of the events of the guesting itself, but one can imagine the tension in the air during the dinners and entertainment. However, when the events was over and both Harald and Eirik were getting ready to go their separate ways, Åke and his son came up to Harald and told them that he had been Halfdan the Black's man and, quote, "If you appreciate the hospitality I have shown you, then please let my son gain your favor and to let him serve under you," end quote. The two men promised each other friendship, and his son was taken in Harald's service. Åke thereafter went to Eirik and gave him costly gifts. However, Eirik did not say much and mounted his horse. The two men talked and eventually came into a forest that was on the route out of the farm. And here, Eirik asked Åke why he had been given the older and lesser goods. Quote, "Are you not my man?" End quote. Åke replied, quote, "I do not believe I have held back on my hospitality for either you or your men. The reason I have given you that which is older is due to yourself being old, while Harald is in the bloom of youth. And when you say that I am your man, I could say that same thing, that you are my man." End quote. After hearing this, Eirik drew his sword and gave him his killing blow and rode off. Harald was just about to leave, but before leaving, he wished to see Åke once more. He dispatched his men to fetch him. However, he was nowhere to be found. Eventually, they found him laying dead in the forest where the Swedish king had just been. Harald gathered his men and proclaimed that the death of Åke would be avenged. And so he set off after Eirik with his men. Harald and his men set off in full haste the route Eirik had taken, and it wasn't long before the two spotted each other. The two groups now rode with all their might, one escaping and one giving chase. The chase went on all the way down to the border of Värmland and Götaland. Here, King Harald stopped and returned to Värmland and put the whole region under himself, and killed Eirik's men wherever he found them. He kept this up the whole summer and fall, and returned to Romerike when winter came. The same winter, he wasted no time. He returned to his ships in the south and sailed across the Hafsfjord into Vingulmark, where he again made this region his. From here, he went south to the region of Ranrike. Everywhere, Geats had mobilized to defend their lands. This part may be a bit confusing to someone unfamiliar with the political situation in the early Viking Age Scandinavia. You see, there was not just the Norwegians, Danes and the Swedes. There was also another group at this time, that being the Geats. They don't seem to have had one king, and united like Swedes, Danes and soon to be Norway. However, they seem to have been at this time a distinct group not considered Swedes. When the ice melted from the Göta River, the Geats closed the river were large timber piles, so that no ship could travel up the river and into the land. Regardless, Harald made landfall and raided and burned all buildings on both sides of the river. The Geats had now put together an army and came against him. A large and bloody battle was fought. Large casualties was taken, but Harald was able to win despite this. There were many battles fought here, and Harald were most of the time successful and won. The result was that all the lands north of the river and all the lands west of Vanir was to be ceded to Norway and Harald. This was done, and here a powerful jarl was put in place, along with a large contingency of men ready to defend the kingdom if needed. After this campaign in Värmland and Ranrike, Harald returned home and travelled for the second time over the mountain and into Trønderlag. Harald arrived in Trønderlag to dreadful rumours. It was said that all the remaining 3 kings had banded together to oppose Harald. This included Hordaland, Rogaland, Agder, and Telemark. This was bad. Harald would likely have preferred to defeat each of them separate and in detail. However, this was now off the table. He had people confirm the rumours, and when this had been done, there was no time to waste. He assembled all the men he could muster and sailed south to meet them. When he passed Sta, the king of Hordaland had already mobilized all the men he could hope to gather, and so he did not fight Harald on his own, and simply retreated south and east. The combined army of all the remaining kingdoms were now united just outside of modern-day Stavanger. And here, the 2 opposing armies would meet in an inland called Hafsfjord. It would all come down to this: all the years of conquest and fighting for Harald. Now, everyone who opposed him had gathered against him, and victory in this battle was the final obstacle to unite Norway and the completion of his oath that he had proclaimed all those years ago. The 2 fleets clashed, and the fighting right away became bloody. Against Harald's ship, the king of Agder had put his ship, and he had a son, Snorre Sturlason, and he was a great berserk and warrior. He was a great threat and fought hard and with all his might. However, he was eventually slain, and as time went on, the fighting began to go in Harald's favor. The battle raged on and on. A great many men were killed, but eventually the combined army had sustained too great a loss, and the battle was over. Harald had done it. He had united Norway under one kingdom, and he was now the sole ruler of it. The Battle of Hafsfjord was a victory for Harald Fairhair. After he had successfully united and accomplished his oath, he was finally able to cut his hair. You see, ever since his oath, he had been letting his hair grow, and so he had gained the nickname Harald Lua, meaning Harald the Hat, because his hair was so dense that it reminded people of a hat. However, after his hair was finally cut and combed, all who saw him agreed that a more fitting name was due, and from here on out, he was henceforth known as Harald Hårfagre, Harald Fairhair. Furthermore, after all those years, he sent another envoy to Gyda, the girl he had wanted from the start, and the one who had started him on his whole quest. This time, she agreed to come, and they together had 5 children. Today, Harald Fairhair has a monument built to him in Haugesund, a large pillar surrounded by 29 smaller pillars, symbolizing the 29 regions he united during his reign. As well as this, stands 3 large swords, 10 meters high, where the final battle, the Battle of Hafsfjord, was fought. The battle that united Norway into one kingdom. Today, Harald Fairhair is a king most Norwegians can name, and is seen in many ways as Norway's founder. And an argument can certainly be made that he was the greatest king Norway has ever had. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate the support support in the comments, and all the people who have subscribed recently. It means a lot. I'm very happy that people are liking this content, and I hope to do more in the future when I have the time for it. But please subscribe if you like the content and like it. Comment your thoughts, what you thought of the video. Leave me a comment so I can read it. And yeah, just thank you for watching.